I reached home 2 hours earlier than anyone expected. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the hallway, glowing like a secret. And there, at the edge of that light, my daughter knelt beside a man I didn't recognize, whispering with a tremor in her voice, "I'm teaching him how to be a woman, just like you taught me." Lydia had raised her daughter, Eva, alone in a weather-beaten house tucked between quiet farmlands and the forest. Their lives were simple, shaped by routines and silence, meals at the same table, evenings reading on the same worn sofa, and the front porch light always left on for safety. Lydia thought she knew every corner of her daughter's heart. But the night she returned home unexpectedly, she realized Eva had been carrying a truth heavy enough to bend the shape of their world. Nothing about the girl she thought she raised was as simple as it seemed. I pushed the front door open with the gentleness you use when you don't want a house to know you've come home early. The air inside felt still, as if it had been holding its breath for hours. Only one lamp glowed in the hallway, a soft amber circle spread across the floor, like somebody had set the light down carefully and then walked away before it cooled. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was the sound, low, murmuring, like words passed through cupped hands. I couldn't tell if it was one voice or two. Just that it wasn't mine and it wasn't supposed to be here. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me as quietly as I could. The lock clicked softer than usual, like it, too, was trying not to interrupt something important. My shoes barely touched the wood as I moved down the hall. The carpet runner swallowed my footsteps, but the house still seemed to notice me, shifting the way old houses do when someone new crosses the threshold. When I reached the end of the hall, I saw the light leaking from under Eva's door. It wasn't bright enough to show shapes, but it was enough to paint a thin golden edge along the floorboards. And in that glow, I saw something else, the faint shadow of someone moving inside. Someone who wasn't my daughter. I didn't breathe. My hand hovered halfway to the doorknob, frozen there, caught between fear and a strange, rising calm that didn't feel like my own. The murmuring stopped. Then a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone carried something like pleading. I pushed the door open. Eva jerked her head up first. The way her eyes widened felt like a secret snapping in half. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her sleeve, as if she could erase whatever I'd interrupted. And then I saw him, a stranger, kneeling on the rug at the foot of her bed, head bowed as though in prayer or punishment. His hair hung over his eyes. His posture looked rehearsed, like he'd been told a long time ago that kneeling was the safest place to be. His hands were shaking. "Eva," I said, but my voice came out. She swallowed. Hard. Her throat worked around the words like they were too heavy to lift. She glanced at the man, then back at me. "He needed help, Mama." That was all. Just 3 words. But she said them with a tremor in her voice that didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like fear. The stranger didn't look at me. His hands tightened into fists, then loosened again. A repeated motion, like he was counting breaths in his palms. Something about him pulled at the back of my memory. A shape, a tilt of the shoulders, a heaviness I'd seen before in someone I loved. But the familiarity felt distant, as if it belonged in a story I had once heard but never finished. "Stand up," I said gently. Not a demand. More like a request you give someone who's been hurt. He didn't move. Eva stepped in front of him, small but fierce, like a candle trying to hide a storm. "Mama, please," she whispered. "Just don't." Her hands trembled at her sides. She looked more afraid of me than of the man kneeling behind her, and that fear hit deeper than anything else in the room. "What's going on?" I asked. Her shoulders tightened. She blinked too fast, the way she used to when she was 7 and trying not to cry in school pictures. "He can't go back there. You don't understand." "Back where?" I asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The stranger finally lifted his head a few inches, just enough for me to see the shape of his jaw. A bruise stretched across one cheekbone, fading from purple into yellow. Fresh bruises sat like fingerprints along his wrists. Something in me sank. "Did someone hurt you?" I asked him quietly. He flinched, not at the question, but at my voice. as if the softness confused him more than shouting would have. Eva's hand hovered just behind his shoulder, not touching, but close enough to show the instinct was there. She was protecting him.
From me.
From the world. From something neither of them would say out loud. He shouldn't be here, Eva said, lowering her gaze. But he had nowhere else to go. I studied the stranger again. The way he kept his head down. The way he avoided every question not with defiance, but with fear. The bruises. The trembling. The familiarity that gnawed at the edges of memory. There was something deeply wrong here. Something bigger than an unexpected visitor. Look at me, I said softly. He hesitated. His shoulders rose slightly with an inhale, held there a moment too long. Then slowly he lifted his chin. For just a heartbeat, our eyes met. And in that fleeting moment, I saw something I didn't expect. Not recognition, but apology. Apology so thick and heavy it felt like it had weight. Before I could say anything, he dropped his gaze again. Eva stepped between us completely now, her voice shaking as she said, "Mama, if you make him leave, something terrible will happen." She meant it. I could hear the truth crackling under every word. I reached for her hand, but she flinched back as though touch itself was too dangerous. The room felt smaller. The air felt colder. Something had shifted in my own home, and I didn't yet know the shape of it. The stranger's breath hitched. Eva wiped her face again, and I stood there in the doorway of my daughter's room, realizing with a sharp, quiet ache. Eva wasn't afraid because a stranger was kneeling in her room. She was afraid because of what would happen if I asked too many questions. And I did ask myself, right then, why does my daughter seem more terrified of her own mother than of the man she's hiding? A question that felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to uncover. I remember the way the room felt before anyone spoke, thick with the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Dust floated in the slanted lamplight, drifting like tiny secrets looking for somewhere to settle. The stranger still knelt on Eva's rug, hands splayed on his thighs, trembling so quietly the movement could have been mistaken for breathing. And Eva stood between us like a thin, shaking bridge. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even take a step. I just asked, softly, the way a mother does when she wants a truth without breaking anything in the process. "What's your name?" The stranger's shoulders jerked, as if the question touched a bruise somewhere inside him. He lifted his head an inch. Not enough to meet my eyes. Just enough to make his voice crawl out of his throat in pieces. "I'm learning." That was all. Just that. Not a name. Not an answer. A fragment dropped like something too sharp to hold. Eva's arms shot out behind her, as if protecting him from my next question before I even breathed it. "She told me," the stranger whispered. "She said she'd teach me." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from emotion, but from fear. I stared at Eva. She wouldn't look at me. Her fingers curled into the hem of her shirt, twisting it the way she used to twist her blanket during thunderstorms when she was little. "Teach him what?" I asked. Eva shook her head quickly, once, twice, the kind of movement you make when something is too dangerous to speak aloud. Her eyes darted to the window, as if she expected someone to be standing there, listening. The stranger's hands trembled harder. That's when I saw the bruises. Deep, finger-shaped, lining both wrists as though someone had dragged him backward through a doorway he didn't want to cross. The collar of his shirt was torn, not ripped in anger, but in desperation. She swallowed. Hard. Her throat worked around the words like they were too heavy to lift. She glanced at the man, then back at me. "He needed help, Mama." That was all. Just 3 words. But she said them with a tremor in her voice that didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like fear. The stranger didn't look at me. His hands tightened into fists, then loosened again. A repeated motion, like he was counting breaths in his palms. Something about him pulled at the back of my memory. A shape, a tilt of the shoulders, a heaviness I'd seen before in someone I loved. But the familiarity felt distant, as if it belonged in a story I had once heard but never finished. "Stand up," I said gently. Not a demand. More like a request you give someone who's been hurt. He didn't move. Eva stepped in front of him, small but fierce, like a candle trying to hide a storm. "Mama, please," she whispered. "Just don't." Her hands trembled at her sides. She looked more afraid of me than of the man kneeling behind her, and that fear hit deeper than anything else in the room. "What's going on?" I asked. Her shoulders tightened. She blinked too fast, the way she used to when she was 7 and trying not to cry in school pictures. "He can't go back there." "You don't understand." "Back where?" I asked. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The stranger finally lifted his head a few inches, just enough for me to see the shape of his jaw. A bruise stretched across one cheekbone, fading from purple into yellow. Fresh bruises sat like fingerprints along his wrists. Something in me sank. "Did someone hurt you?" I asked him quietly. He flinched, not at the question, but at my voice, as if the softness confused him more than shouting would have. Eva's hand hovered just behind his shoulder, not touching, but close enough to show the instinct was there. She was protecting him. From me. From the world. From something neither of them would say out loud. "He shouldn't be here," Eva said, lowering her gaze. But he had nowhere else to go. I studied the stranger again. The way he kept his head down. The way he avoided every question not with defiance, but with fear. The bruises. The trembling. The familiarity that gnawed at the edges of memory. There was something deeply wrong here. Something bigger than an unexpected visitor. "Look at me," I said softly. He hesitated. His shoulders rose slightly with an inhale, held there a moment too long. Then, slowly, he lifted his chin. For just a heartbeat, our eyes met. And in that fleeting moment, I saw something I didn't expect. Not recognition, but apology. Apology so thick and heavy it felt like it had weight. Before I could say anything, he dropped his gaze again. Eva stepped between us completely now, her voice shaking as she said, "Mama, if you make him leave, something terrible will happen." She meant it. I could hear the truth crackling under every word. I reached for her hand, but she flinched back as though touch itself was too dangerous. The room felt smaller. The air felt colder. Something had shifted in my own home, and I didn't yet know the shape of it. The stranger's breath hitched. Eva wiped her face again, and I stood there in the doorway of my daughter's room, realizing with a sharp, quiet ache. Eva wasn't afraid because a stranger was kneeling in her room. She was afraid because of what would happen if I asked too many questions. And I did ask myself right then, why does my daughter seem more terrified of her own mother than of the man she's hiding? A question that felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to uncover. I remember the way the room felt before anyone spoke, thick with the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Dust floated in the slanted lamplight, drifting like tiny secrets looking for somewhere to settle. The stranger still knelt on Eva's rug, hands splayed on his thighs, trembling so quietly the movement could have been mistaken for breathing. And Eva stood between us like a thin, shaking bridge. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even take a step. I just asked, softly, the way a mother does when she wants a truth without breaking anything in the process. "What's your name?" The stranger's shoulders jerked, as if the question touched a bruise somewhere inside him. He lifted his head an inch. Not enough to meet my eyes. Just enough to make his voice crawl out of his throat in pieces. "I'm learning." That was all. Just that. Not a name. Not an answer. A fragment dropped like something too sharp to hold. Eva's arm shot out behind her, as if protecting him from my next question before I even breathed it. "She told me," the stranger whispered. "She said she'd teach me." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from emotion, but from fear. I stared at Eva. She wouldn't look at me. Her fingers curled into the hem of her shirt, twisting it the way she used to twist her blanket during thunderstorms when she was little. "Teach him what?" I asked. Eva shook her head quickly, once, twice, the kind of movement you make when something is too dangerous to speak aloud. Her eyes darted to the window as if she expected someone to be standing there, listening. The stranger's hands trembled harder. That's when I saw the bruises. Deep, finger-shaped, lining both wrists, as though someone had dragged him backward through a doorway he didn't want to cross. The collar of his shirt was torn, not ripped in anger, but in desperation. As though he'd been yanked by the fabric hard enough for the stitching to give before he did. Who did that? I whispered. He flinched. Eva stepped closer to him, and the room grew smaller. I moved toward the dresser, where my phone lay charging. My fingers brushed the screen, waking it with a glow. Eva, I said, my voice steady even as something cold slid down my spine. I'm calling the police. The moment the words left me, Eva spun around so fast her hair whipped across her face. Her hands flew up, not to stop me, but as if she were bracing for a blow that wasn't coming from me at all. No, Mama, she cried, breathless, frantic, like she was drowning in her own fear. They can't know he's here. The stranger's breath hitched at her words, and he folded in on himself, pulling his bruised wrists toward his chest. His head dropped lower, almost touching the floor. He looked like someone who expected punishment for existing. I felt the edge of something jagged in my chest, not anger, not pity, but confusion so deep it made my knees weaken. Eva, I repeated, more carefully this time, as if the air around us might shatter. Why not? She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. Tears slipped through the gaps between her fingers and dropped onto the rug, spreading into the fabric like tiny dark stains. It struck me then, she wasn't scared of the police. She was scared for him, terrified. The stranger whispered something, too soft to catch. His voice crawled across the floorboards like a dying ember. Eva dropped to her knees beside him, touching his shoulder gently, as if afraid she might hurt him by accident. Don't, she whispered. Not again. Not again. Those two words sat heavy between us, like lead on an old wooden table. Something about this man, the bruises, the trembling, the silence, wasn't just strange. It was dangerous. And yet he looked less like a threat and more like someone who'd been running from one. She looked at me finally. Really looked, with a kind of broken honesty I hadn't seen in her eyes since she was a child confessing a lie too heavy for her small chest. Because, she whispered, he followed me. Followed. A new coldness settled in the room, threading itself through the floorboards, the cracks in the walls, the spaces between our breaths. Eva, I said, stepping forward, is he stalking you? She shook her head, tears clinging to her jaw.
No.
Mama, he's hiding. From them. From who? She looked toward the window again, the same window she'd glanced at earlier, as though expecting shadows to crawl across the glass. Her lips parted, but she didn't say a name. Just a single sentence, trembling. They hurt him because he knows something. The stranger's hands tightened. His entire body went still for a moment, like he was listening for distant footsteps. I lifted my phone again. If he's in danger, the police. No, Eva screamed, not loud, but sharp, like a thin edge dragging across glass. If they find out he's here, Mama, please, please, just trust me. The stranger finally looked up. His eyes were hollow, but not empty. Behind the emptiness lived a kind of raw, fragile awareness, like someone who'd seen too much, survived too much, and knew that speaking the wrong word could cost him everything. And in that moment, watching him cling to the rug as if the floor were the only safe place left in the world, I realized something unsettling. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting Eva. I lowered the phone slowly, setting it on the dresser. Eva let out a breath that collapsed her whole frame. The stranger watched me, finally lifting his gaze fully, and his eyes held something I couldn't decipher. Gratitude, maybe. Or warning. Or perhaps a plea he was too afraid to voice. I stepped closer. Not enough to frighten him. Just enough to see the small details, the tiny scars beneath the bruises, the way his fingers twitched toward Eva whenever she moved, the faint redness along his throat as if a rope or hand had lingered there too long. What danger follows you? I whispered. He opened his mouth, exhaled, and closed it again. Eva touched his back gently. He leaned into the touch like someone who hadn't been held kindly in years. Mama, she whispered, please don't ask him that yet.
Yet.
The word lingered. Heavy. Inevitable.
Terrifying.
Somewhere in the house, A floorboard creaked. The stranger's entire body snapped upright, tense and alert, as though someone had just placed a hand on the back of his neck. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the hallway, at the darkness waiting beyond the door. Eva grabbed his wrist, the bruised one, and held it tightly. Something was coming for him. Something real. Something that had already left its fingerprints on his skin. And I found myself asking, not out loud but deep inside, the question that would not let go. What danger followed this man into my home, and how long until it reached my daughter too? The house always feels different after midnight. Even the walls seem to breathe slower, as if they're listening instead of holding everything up. I walked down the hallway with the soft hush of my socks brushing the floor, careful not to wake either of them. A sliver of moonlight cut beneath Eva's door, pale and cool, like a blade of winter. They were both asleep, Eva curled small beneath her blanket, the stranger folded on the floor beside her bed like a shadow trying to rest. Their breathing was uneven but quiet. Too quiet. Something kept tugging at me, a feeling behind my ribs that wouldn't let me return to my room. A feeling that said, "There are answers here. You just have to be brave enough to look." I slipped inside, the door clicking shut behind me with the softest sigh. Eva's room smelled of lavender detergent and the faint metallic edge of fear. Her desk was cluttered with papers, clothes draped over the chair, her backpack half open. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. But when I bent to pick up a sweater tossed near the foot of her bed, my hand brushed something wooden. A corner. A handle. Something hidden purposefully. I knelt, holding my breath, and lifted the bed skirt. There it was, a narrow wooden drawer, pushed hard against the wall, as if she wanted it out of reach from anyone but herself. I hesitated, my fingers resting on the drawer's edge. The silence around me thickened, wrapping itself around my wrists. Then I pulled. It didn't budge. Locked. A simple brass lock, small enough to break, stubborn enough to make my pulse quicken. I tried once more, gently this time, and it shifted just enough for a faint click to whisper through the room. The drawer slid open an inch, then another. Inside was clothing. Not Eva's. Women's clothes, folded with care, but clearly worn. Softer colors, larger sizes, a different life sewn into the seams. A cardigan that smelled faintly of citrus. A dress with fraying cuffs. A scarf that looked hand-knitted by someone patient, someone gentle. None of it belonged to my daughter. My throat tightened as I lifted a blouse, feeling the weight of someone else's story in the fabric. Someone older, maybe. Someone who didn't live here. Someone who left in a hurry, or couldn't stay. Beneath the clothes was a notebook. A plain, spiral-bound journal with a cracked spine. On the cover, written in Eva's handwriting, "Lessons to Survive." A coldness crept into my palms as I opened to the first page. Day 1, he pretends first. Always. I flipped to another entry. Keep the doors unlocked when he starts acting normal. Locked doors make him worse. Another page. Never believe the apology. If he ever comes back, don't let him pretend again. Pretend. Again. The words pulsed on the page like a heartbeat in ink. My hands began to shake. A feeling, heavy and familiar, settled low in my stomach, the same feeling I had when I found a bruised apple in Eva's lunchbox years ago and she swore she dropped it. The same feeling when she came home late from school and said she got lost, even though she'd walked that path her whole life. A quiet lie wrapped around a louder truth. Who had she been preparing for? Who was she afraid would come back? Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I froze, the journal half open, the moonlight brushing over my knuckles like cold breath. It was only the house settling. Or so I told myself. But something inside me whispered that homes don't creak like that unless they're trying to warn you. I placed the journal gently back inside the drawer, leaving the pages open just enough to return quickly if I needed to. The clothes rustled softly as I lowered them over the notebook again, like tucking someone's memory back to sleep. But a single piece of paper had slipped free, a torn edge from another page. I almost put it back without reading it. Almost. The handwriting was different from Eva's, sharper, slanted, rushed. Protect her. 2 words. Not signed. Just left there, hidden like a secret too big to keep in a straight line. I looked over at my daughter, her face soft in sleep, but her brows furrowed as though dreaming of cliffs instead of clouds. The stranger beside her was curled inward, as though expecting someone to take something from him at any moment. The room felt heavier, darker, crowded with the weight of stories I hadn't been told. I slid the drawer closed, pushing it back beneath the bed until it touched the wall with a quiet thud. Then I stood. Slowly, carefully. My legs felt unsteady, as though the floor had shifted underneath me. Eva murmured something in her sleep, a single word I couldn't understand, and turned her face deeper into the pillow. The stranger didn't move at all, except for the slightest shiver in his shoulders. Was it cold in here? Or was something else brushing through the room? I stepped toward the door, placing my hand on the knob, my pulse thudding beneath my skin. Before leaving, I let my eyes drift back one last time. The drawer was hidden again. The journal was hidden. The clothes were hidden. But the truth was no longer hidden from me. Eva had been preparing for someone's return. Someone who pretended. Someone who hurt. Someone she feared enough to write lessons to survive. And the stranger, bruised, trembling, silent, was somehow tied to that danger. I closed the door behind me with the softest click. The hallway felt colder now, as if the house was exhaling a secret it wished I'd never asked for. I leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing through the heaviness pressing against my chest. Finally, I whispered into the dim, empty air. "Who have you been preparing for, Eva?" But the silence only offered more questions. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, a pipe groaned, a sound like something waking up. A sound that answered nothing and warned everything. The house always sounds different after midnight. In the daylight it creaks and sighs like any old place, settling into itself. But past 12, when the street outside turns into a long, quiet breath, the walls take on an echo, like they're remembering things I've tried hard to forget. That night, the clock on the hallway table had just slipped past 1:17 when I realized I could still hear him breathing. Not the stranger. My daughter. Eva's room was down the hall from mine, door cracked open the way she used to insist on as a child. I'd said goodnight an hour ago, watched her lie down, watched the stranger curl himself up on the rug like an obedient dog she'd decided to let in from the rain. Now their breathing carried through the old plaster. 2 different rhythms. One shallow, one deep. I sat on the edge of my bed, fingers digging into the quilt my mother made, staring at the shadow of their door. Sleep wasn't coming. Not with a nameless man on my daughter's floor. Not with that sentence in my head, looping like a scratched record. "They can't know he's here." She'd said it like a plea, like a warning. The house was dark except for the weak strip of light from the street lamp outside, slipping in through the blinds and laying narrow bars across the hallway floor. I listened until both breaths in Eva's room settled into something steady, almost synchronized. And then I stood up. I knew better than to turn on the overhead light. The switch in my room was loud, an old plastic snap that always seemed to shout. Instead, I reached for the small flashlight in my nightstand drawer, the one I used when storms knocked the power out. The beam was soft, yellowed with age. I cupped my hand around it, dulling it further, and stepped into the hallway. The floorboard outside the bathroom complained in its usual way, but the house fell quiet again after. No shift, no sudden whisper from behind Eva's door. I told myself I was only going to check that it was locked. That was all. The knob turned easily under my hand. Unlocked. Of course. I held my breath and pushed the door open a few inches more. Eva was on her side, back to me, one hand curled under her cheek the way she slept when she was little. The stranger lay on the rug near the foot of the bed, his knees tucked up, one arm stretched toward the wall. His face was turned away, cheek pressed into the worn fibers. For one small, fragile moment, they looked like nothing more than 2 tired souls who had simply run out of day. But then the flashlight beam landed on his wrist. The bruises were clearer now. Finger-shaped shadows, yellow and purple, wrapping around bone. The torn collar of his shirt gaped open, revealing the edge of another mark, higher on his shoulder. Old or new, I couldn't tell. I pulled my hand back quickly, letting the darkness fold over them again. If I let myself think too much, I would stop. And if I stopped now, I knew I wouldn't start again. Instead of going in, I closed the door gently until it was back to its familiar narrow gap. I stood there until my heartbeat slowed, then slipped back down the hall. But I didn't go to my room. My feet carried me to the small storage closet where I kept spare towels and the box of things I didn't want to look at but couldn't bring myself to throw away. In the bottom, under old picture frames and a chipped vase, was a thin metal tool, the flat, curved kind my father used to pick old locks in the barn when he misplaced the key. Back in front of Eva's room, I listened again. No change. No stirred air. I stepped inside this time, moving slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the faint gray of streetlight. The room smelled faintly of lavender and something sharper underneath, sweat, maybe, or fear. The curtains breathed in and out with a draft from the old windows. Eva's soft snore broke slightly as she shifted, but she didn't wake. The stranger didn't move at all. I went to the far side of the bed, where I knew she kept the drawers that were never quite shut. Her desk, her dresser, all the familiar places of a girl who grew into a woman in the same four walls. But it wasn't any of those I was searching for. I'd seen it earlier when she bent down to grab a sweater. A shallow gap under the bed frame, the edge of something wooden, the faint glint of a small metal latch. Now, on my knees, jeans catching on the worn carpet, I turned the flashlight to its lowest setting and aimed it under the bed. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the beam. A shoe, an old notebook, a sock that had lost its partner. And there, flush against the wooden slats, a narrow drawer with a tiny brass lock. My heart stuttered in my throat. The house had never felt so quiet. I slid the lockpick into the small opening, fingers remembering the patient twist my father once showed me. Metal against metal, a faint, stubborn resistance. I swallowed, wiping my free hand on my thigh, and tried again. Behind me, the stranger exhaled. I froze, pulse thudding in my ears, but neither he nor Eva shifted. Their breathing returned to its steady rhythm. There was a soft click. The lock gave. I eased the drawer open an inch, then another, until my fingers could hook the edge and pull it fully into the light. The first thing I saw was fabric. Not teenage shirts or worn pajamas, but garments meant for someone older. Blouses with careful seams and understated patterns. A long skirt in muted gray. A sweater with pill balls along the sleeves, stretched where someone broader at the shoulders had worn it. They were folded neatly, too neatly, like they were waiting for someone. Not Eva. The sizes were wrong. A number higher. A different shape. Beneath the stack of clothes was a notebook, cheap, spiral-bound, the kind you pick up at a grocery store checkout when school is about to start. The cover was plain, except for 3 words written in Eva's careful, square handwriting. Lessons to survive. My throat tightened as I picked it up. The paper crackled under my fingers, edges worn soft from being turned and turned again. I opened to the first page at random. Rule 1. Never answer the door alone. Rule 2. Keep a bag ready under the bed. Rule 3. If he cries, remember he cried last time too. The air seemed to thin. I flipped further. Pages filled with notes, some sentences bold, underlined, others scratched out so hard the paper nearly tore. There were sketches of doorways, arrows pointing to windows, lists of places, shelters, bus stations, names with question marks. Halfway through the notebook, my hand stopped. The sentence was written in darker ink, as if she'd pressed harder, letting the pen bite through to the next page. If he ever comes back, don't let him pretend again. The room tilted. I could almost see her here, hunched on the edge of her bed late at night, pen in hand, writing that line. How many times had she read it back to herself? How many times had she rehearsed some future she hoped she'd never have to live? Behind me, someone shifted. The mattress sighed. I closed the notebook quickly but gently, sliding it back into the drawer, the words still burning against my palm. The clothes went on top again, my fingers clumsy now, leaving the folds less perfect than before. It felt like I was erasing evidence from a crime scene I didn't yet understand. When I pushed the drawer back into place, the wood whispered against the frame, louder than I wanted it to. I held my breath, waiting. Mom. The word was soft, blurred with sleep. Eva. I rose slowly, careful not to bump the bed, and found her eyes on me, half open, clouded, trying to focus. The stranger was still on the floor, but his hand had curled into a fist. What are you doing? Her voice was a hoarse whisper. I swallowed, stepping into the shadow so she couldn't see my face clearly. Just checking the window, I lied. It's getting cold. She watched me for a moment too long, suspicion and exhaustion wrestling in her gaze. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned her face back toward the wall. She didn't ask why my hands were shaking. Back in my own room, I closed the door and leaned against it, the darkness pressing in like a heavy coat. My mind replayed those 3 words over and over. If he ever comes back. Not if he comes. If he comes back. He'd been here before. I sat on the edge of my bed until the first gray hint of dawn seeped through the blinds. The house began to sound like itself again. Pipes rattling, the refrigerator humming, a car starting somewhere down the street. But under all of it, there was a new sound now. The quiet, insistent echo of a question that wouldn't let me rest. Who, exactly, had my daughter been preparing for, and had he already stepped across our threshold? The thunder had been rolling for an hour before the rain finally broke open. It came down in long silver rods, striking the windows like a firm hand asking to be heard. I found Eva at the kitchen table, her small shoulders drawn inward, as if she were trying to disappear into her own breath. A single bulb flickered above her, making the room feel both too bright and not bright enough. She didn't look at me when I sat across from her. She only kept her palms flat on the table, fingers trembling slightly, eyes locked on the storm outside, as though waiting for it to answer something inside her. I waited. Sometimes silence cracks a truth open better than any demand. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, like a thread pulled too tight. Mama, I have to tell you something. The thunder shook the glass behind her, but she didn't flinch. She had been holding this too long. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying myself. I'm listening. For a moment, she only stared at the rain. Then she drew a breath so sharp it seemed to hurt her. He's not a stranger. The kitchen shifted around me, the way a house feels right before it settles. A coldness crept into the space between us. Who is he, Eva? I asked softly. Her eyes lifted to mine, scared, heavy, determined. He's my brother. The words fell with a weight that made the air between us still. Your brother? I repeated, trying to keep my voice from shaking. She nodded. Half-brother. His name is Aaron. I searched her face for some hint of misunderstanding, but all I found was the quiet ache of someone who had been carrying too many secrets alone. The thunder groaned long and low, rattling the spoon in the sink. I didn't know your father had another child. Something in my chest tightened. The past, that unruly, unfinished thing, had found its way back into our home. Eva's hands curled inward, as if she were holding something delicate and dangerous at once. He was born 2 years before me, she continued. His mother worked with Dad at the old lumber mill. They kept everything hidden. When she died, Aaron ended up with his grandparents. But she swallowed hard. They weren't kind. The clock on the wall ticked once, loud enough to be noticed. He used to run away, she said softly. A lot. Dad would go find him, bring him back. But when Dad died, no one went looking anymore. Her voice quivered like wet paper. A flash of lightning illuminated her face, tired, older than her years. Eva, how did you find him? I asked. I didn't, she said. He found me. Rain slid down the window in thin lines, like someone writing messages with trembling fingers. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the kitchen. A month ago, after work, I saw him sitting near the bus station. He looked lost, like someone who'd been outside of the world for too long. She blinked against tears. He said he recognized my eyes. Said he'd followed me for weeks just to make sure. A chill moved up my spine. And you brought him here? I asked. Yes, she whispered. Not inside at first. Just in the yard. I gave him food. Blankets. He slept in the shed when it rained. I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to ask why she hadn't trusted me with this. But the way she sat, small, shaking, braced for disappointment, quieted all of that. Instead, I reached for her hand. You should have told me. I know, she said. I was trying to protect you. Her fingers tightened around mine. But, Mama, that's not the only reason he's here. The storm seemed to pause, as if holding its breath with me. She inhaled slowly. He said someone was after him. My stomach dropped. Who? I don't know. Someone from where he lived before. Someone he doesn't want to find me. Her voice cracked on the last word. He said they watch women. That's why he wanted me to teach him. I frowned. Teach him what? Her tears finally broke, sliding down her cheeks with quiet grief.
How to hide, she said.
How to move through the world without being seen. How to survive without being noticed. Something inside me sank lower and lower, the way a stone drops into deep water. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. He said they hurt women to get to the men they want. He didn't want them to use me. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the storm-dark yard beyond her shoulder. I imagined a shadow out there, someone unseen, someone patient. I swallowed the fear pressing into my chest. Eva, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I knew you'd want to call the police. She shook her head hard. And Mama, they can't know he's here. They can't. Her voice carried a terror I hadn't heard from her since she was a child. The storm wind whistled under the doorframe. What exactly did he teach you? I asked. Eva looked down at her hands, twisting them together. Not to trust uniforms, she whispered. Not to open the door after dark. Not to say his name out loud when we're alone. A cold current swept through the room, though no window was open. I felt the truth forming. Slow, sharp, undeniable. Aaron wasn't running from the world. He was hiding from someone who had been in it far too long. Eva's breath trembled. Mama, if they find him, they'll find us. Her words sat heavily in the quiet. The thunder rolled again, farther away this time, but the tension in the air stayed thick and unmoving. I stood slowly, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. For a moment the darkness outside looked ordinary, rain falling, the yard shimmering under the porch light. Then near the old maple tree I caught a shape. Still. Watching. I let the curtain fall. Behind me, Eva whispered. Mama, what do we do now? I turned toward her, my daughter, trembling, trying to carry someone else's history as though it belonged to her. The house felt different now. Less like a home. More like a place someone else had been watching. I sat beside her, took her hand again, and felt her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. We lock the doors, I said softly. We stay together. And tomorrow, we find out who he's running from. But even as I spoke, the rain eased into a soft drizzle, and something outside shifted. Branches, footsteps, or simply the storm letting go. Whatever it was, it left one question echoing through the quiet kitchen. Why did the danger feel so close, and why had it followed them into our lives? The sound that wakes me isn't loud. It's not breaking glass, or a shout, or even the creak of the front door. It's footsteps. Soft, deliberate, moving through wet grass just outside my window. For a moment I lie still, holding my breath, listening to the night breathe around our house. The clock on the nightstand glows 3:17 a.m., that thin hour when the world feels half-finished, when even the refrigerator hum sounds unsure of itself. Beside me, the spot where Daniel should be is empty. The blanket lies smooth and cool. That, more than the footsteps, is what makes my heart start to climb. I push the curtain aside with 2 fingers. Daniel stands barefoot in the middle of the backyard, in his sleep shirt and pajama pants, toes sinking into the damp earth. The porch light throws him into pale relief, a man carved out of tired shadows. He's facing the tree line, shoulders squared, head tilted slightly as if listening for someone to call his name from the woods. He doesn't move. He doesn't shiver. He just waits. For a moment, It feels like I'm the one intruding. Like I've stepped into a conversation I can't hear. I slip my feet into my slippers and pull on my robe. The hallway floor is cold, wood creaking softly in familiar places, the house remembering every step I've ever taken through it. I pause outside Caleb's door and press my ear to the wood. No rustling. No whispered counting like he sometimes does when he's scared. Just the soft weight of his breathing. Stay asleep, baby, I whisper, more to myself than to him. The back door latch is colder than it should be. I turn it slowly, careful not to make that sharp clicking sound the metal likes to give away. The night air meets me like a damp hand on my face. Cool, smelling of wet soil, last year's leaves, and something faintly metallic under it all, like rain that hasn't fallen yet. Daniel, I say, barely above a breath. He doesn't turn. The grass soaks my slippers in seconds as I cross the yard, the ground soft and uneven under my feet. Out here, the house looks smaller, almost fragile, a box of light behind me with one tired kitchen bulb burning over the sink. I stop a few feet behind him, close enough to see the stiff line of his back, far enough not to startle him. His chest rises and falls in a slow, measured rhythm, the same way it did that night he pretended to sleep while I stood in the doorway and watched. There's something practiced about it, something that belongs more to control than to rest. I heard footsteps, he says finally, voice low, as if he's answering someone who spoke before me. He was here again. The hairs on my arms stand up. He who? I ask. My voice sounds too loud in the open yard. Daniel, look at me. He turns his head a fraction, just enough that I can see the profile of his face. His eyes are on the woods, not on me. The porch light doesn't reach that far. The trees are just a wall of black, branches stitching together against the sky like scar tissue. You saw the picture, he murmurs. You know what he looks like. The attic photo flashes in my mind. Two boys, side by side. One I can name, at least the younger version of him. Daniel at 15, leaning against a fence, hair too long, smile too wide. The other boy, standing just a little behind. Same eyes Caleb has. Same half-tilted head. The date in the corner that didn't make sense. And then Caleb whispering, "That's the boy Daddy dreams about." I swallow, the back of my throat dry. Daniel, that picture was taken before Caleb was even born. I know, he says. That's the problem. A breeze moves through the yard, barely there, but it makes the tree line shiver. Something about the sound makes me think of whispers, too low to understand, but close enough to feel. You're sleepwalking, I say, reaching for logic, because it's safer than whatever this is. Come inside. Your feet are freezing. He lifts one foot, looks down at the dirt clinging to his skin like it belongs there, and then sets it back in the same spot. I'm not asleep, Miriam. The way he says my name makes me feel suddenly small. Like we're not husband and wife in our backyard, but strangers standing on either side of a story I don't know yet. I take another step closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the faint tremor in his hands. Up close, I can hear his breathing better. It's not quite even. There are tiny stutters, almost like he's holding something back between each inhale, each exhale. Then why are you out here? I ask. Why are you facing the woods? He hesitates. It's long enough that I can hear the hum of the streetlight out front, the distant whine of a car on the highway, the slow ticking of our kitchen clock drifting out through the open window. Because that's where he stands, Daniel says finally. When he comes. The words settle between us like a stone dropped into deep water. I don't want to look at the tree line. I do it anyway. There's nothing there. Just darkness, the suggestion of trunks and branches, the faint catch of light on something. Maybe a wet rock, maybe a bottle someone tossed and never picked up. But even from here, I can feel it. That pressure. The sense of being watched from just beyond what the eye can see. Who, Daniel? I press, softer now. Who stands there? He closes his eyes for a moment. When he opens them again, they look older, like he hasn't slept in weeks. The boy, he says. The one from the road. The one I didn't save. My heart stumbles. Images rise uninvited. The old family photo. The letters he never sent. The way Caleb flinched at the sound of the basement door locking. The night drives home late, headlights off for no good reason. You told me it was a deer, I say. My voice is barely more than air. That night. The dent in the car. The mud on your shoes. You said you'd hit a deer. He huffs out something that might be a laugh if there were any warmth left in him. I've told you a lot of things, he says. You believed what you needed to. Lightning flickers far away, behind the clouds. It doesn't reach us, but it turns the edge of the sky a pale, sickly white for a second, enough to make the outline of the trees sharper. For just a heartbeat, I think I see it a smaller shape, near the edge of the woods. Too low to be a man, too tall to be a child. Then the darkness folds over it like water. Come inside, I say again, but there's a tremor now. For Caleb, if not for me. At the mention of our son, something shifts in Daniel's face. A crack. A flinch. The smallest evidence of guilt or fear. I can't tell which. He dreams about him, Daniel whispers. Did he tell you that? Our boy. He dreams about the one on the road. Calls him by the name I never said out loud. Whose name? I ask. Daniel's jaw tightens. Liam. The name is a cold hand around my spine. Not Caleb. Liam. The woods seem to lean in closer, listening. I thought he was gone, Daniel continues, looking straight ahead. I thought if I took our son home, if I loved him enough, if I never told you, maybe the road would stay behind us. The wind picks up, moving the grass around his ankles. I can't help it. I glance toward the tree line again. This time, I don't see a shape. I feel one, like a weight on the back of my neck. And now? I ask, my voice small. Now he stands there, Daniel says. Every night. And sometimes he gets closer. The kitchen light flickers behind us, once.
Twice.
Then steadies. For a moment, I imagine Caleb waking up, padding down the hallway, standing at the window to see his father in the yard talking to the trees. I imagine how that looks to him. How it sounded when he whispered, "Don't check on Daddy tonight." Does he want you? I ask quietly. Or our son? Daniel's answer is a long time coming. When it does, it's barely more than a breath. I don't know, he says. Maybe he doesn't know either. A dog barks 2 houses over, sharp and sudden, breaking the spell. Daniel blinks like someone turned the world back on. He looks down at his bare feet, at the grass, then finally at me. Miriam, he says, and there is something like apology in it. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, I lie. You weren't the only one walking tonight. We stand there a moment longer, the distance between us feeling wider than the yard. Finally, I reach out and come inside, I whisper. Stay away from the woods, Daniel. Please. He lets me lead him back toward the house, one slow step at a time. At the threshold, I glance back over my shoulder. The tree line is just darkness again. Still, as I close the door, I can't shake the feeling that someone in those shadows is counting our footsteps. And for the first time, I wonder if the warning Caleb gave me, "Don't check on Daddy tonight," wasn't meant to protect Daniel from me, but to protect me from what Daniel keeps bringing in out of the dark. The house had just begun to settle into that fragile nighttime stillness, the kind that rests on the air like dust, when the engine noise cut through it. A long, low rumble, too deliberate to be passing by, too heavy to belong to any neighbor's car. I was in the hallway, halfway to turning off the last lamp, when I saw Aaron's shadow freeze against the living room wall. His posture changed instantly. Not startled, not curious, but hunted. His shoulders tightened, his breath hitched, and he backed away from the window as though the glass itself had grown teeth. "Aaron," I whispered, stepping toward him. He didn't answer. He simply raised one trembling hand, pointing toward the front yard. I followed his gaze. Outside, a pickup truck idled at the curb, engine vibrating like an animal restless in its cage. The headlights were off, but a dull glow from a street lamp revealed the outline of a man behind the wheel. His face was shadowed, but his posture told me everything. Elbow hanging out the window, cigarette ember pulsing red in the dark, gaze fixed on our house. Watching. Claiming. Remembering. The truck didn't move. It didn't need to. Its presence alone felt like a threat spoken without words. I heard Aaron swallow hard behind me. "He found me," he whispered. "I knew he would." The air in the room seemed to shrink. My fingers curled around the curtain, suddenly aware of how thin fabric really is. "Who is he?" I asked, eyes still locked on the silhouette. Aaron shook his head once, frantic, as if the name itself was dangerous. "Don't say anything. Don't turn on more lights. Just stay back." I watched the stranger lift his cigarette to his lips, take a slow drag, and exhale a cloud that drifted like a warning. Then the truck rolled forward, not fast, not slow, just steady. He drove past the house, but kept his gaze turned toward us the entire time, until the taillights vanished around the bend. It felt less like he was leaving and more like he was promising to come back. I drew the curtains closed and stepped away. "Aaron," I said softly, "tell me who he is." He sunk onto the couch, face pale, eyes shining with the kind of fear people don't learn all at once, the kind carved into them over years. "He used to come home drunk," Aaron murmured, voice small. "My mother would hide me. I'd fit inside the laundry cart back when I was little." The image pierced me. A boy curled between towels and sheets, praying not to be found. When I grew older, he'd ask me to man up, to be like him, to take the hits without crying. Aaron's jaw clenched. But I wasn't like him. I never wanted to be. A storm of emotion flickered across his face, shame, anger, and something deeper, something bruised. "One night he told me he'd make me into a man his way," Aaron whispered. "He said I'd learn how to act right." So I ran. I didn't look back. My stomach tightened. "And now?" Aaron shivered. "He's here to finish what he started." Silence drifted between us, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the lingering echo of the truck's engine in my memory. My mind replayed the man's posture, the way he stared at the house with the confidence of someone who believed he still owned the boy hiding inside it. "He won't come in here," I said carefully, though I wasn't entirely sure. "He can't touch you under my roof." Aaron looked at me, then really looked, and for the first time since he arrived, his expression cracked into something fragile, disbelieving. "You don't know him," he whispered. "He doesn't care about doors." A chill rippled through me. That night, long after Aaron and Eva had retreated to their rooms, I stood at the kitchen window with the lights off, staring out into the quiet street. The moon hung low, thin as a blade, cutting shadows across the yard. Every shifting tree branch looked like a figure. Every passing gust sounded like tires rolling over gravel. The house felt too small, too soft, too easy to break into. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once and fell silent, as if someone had told it to hush. I touched the window pane, cold, almost icy, and felt the weight of an unspoken truth settle on my shoulders. This man wasn't just coming for Aaron. He was coming for the version of Aaron he could no longer control. And he didn't strike me as someone who would walk away empty-handed. The night pressed against the glass like a warning. What did this man want from Aaron? Revenge? Punishment? Or to reclaim the boy he believed still belonged to him? Whatever it was, the answer was moving toward us on four wheels, wrapped in smoke, and carrying a darkness that knew exactly where we lived. Dinner had always been our smallest ritual. Quiet plates, soft clinks, the hum of the overhead light flickering like an old heart. I'd warmed the stew twice, waiting for Daniel to come back inside from whatever corner of the yard he'd been staring into again. When he finally sat down, he moved like someone underwater, slow, detached, forehead still damp with sweat despite the cool evening air. Caleb sat across from him, tiny feet swinging, crayons scattered near his plate. Just a normal night. Or it should have been. But the moment I set Daniel's bowl down, he flinched. Not in pain, in recognition. As if something unseen had brushed against him. He stared at the steam rising from the stew, pupils shrinking, breath hitching. Then, under the soft hum of the refrigerator, I heard it. Aaron. Barely a whisper. Not a prayer, not a memory, something brittle, like a name he didn't want escaping his mouth. I froze mid-step, the dish towel slipping from my hand. Who? I asked. Daniel didn't look up. His lips moved again, the word caught behind his teeth. Across the table, Caleb had already stopped coloring. His eyes widened, not in confusion, but in recognition. Far too old for 6 years. "That's the boy," he whispered. His voice sent a cold ripple down my spine. Daniel jerked like he'd been struck. His hand shot out, gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles whitened, tendons straining, breath sharpening as if he were bracing against a blow. "Daniel," I said softly. "Who is Aaron?" He didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared down into the bowl like he expected something to rise from it. "He never stays gone for long," he muttered.
Gone.
Not dead, not missing, just gone, as if he expected a return. The overhead light flickered again, humming louder, casting small trembling shadows over Daniel's eyes. Caleb slid off his chair and pressed himself into my side, tiny fingers curling around the hem of my sleeve. I touched Daniel's wrist. His skin burned hot. "Daniel," I whispered, "look at me." He didn't. His jaw ticked once, twice, a muscle fighting itself. "Is Aaron someone you knew? A friend? A brother? A child?" Nothing. Not even a flicker. The silence stretched between us like old rope, fraying, ready to snap if either of us pulled too hard. Caleb tugged my sleeve again. "Mama, that's the boy Daddy dreams about." Daniel's shoulders collapsed inward. A broken exhale escaped him, and for one small second, I saw something raw flicker across his face. Fear, nostalgia, guilt. Maybe all three. Then he shut it down, like a door slamming. He pushed his chair back slowly, scraping wood against tile in a way that made my teeth ache. He stood, hands shaking at his sides, eyes locked on the far wall. "Miriam," he said, voice too flat, "don't ask me again." His tone wasn't harsh. It was hollow, like speaking cost him something. "Daniel," I said, stepping closer, "the more you hide, the more afraid Caleb becomes." Caleb buried his face in my hip. Daniel stiffened. His breath rattled. He wasn't looking at Caleb, but every nerve in his body turned toward him, the way trees lean toward the wind before they realize it's a storm. "It's not him I'm afraid for," Daniel whispered. A chill prickled the back of my neck. "Then who?" I asked. This time he lifted his head just barely, but he still wouldn't look at me. His gaze hovered over my shoulder, somewhere distant, somewhere stuck in a past he kept barricaded with silence. "Me," he said. One word, small as dust. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall like a man being pulled faster than his feet could move. His shadow lingered long after he'd gone, stretched thin across the doorway, trembling with the flickering light. Caleb pressed his face into my side again. "Mama, Daddy's scared." "I know, sweetheart. But Daddy never gets scared." "I know," I whispered. Even I barely recognized Daniel anymore. The man who used to steady ladders with one hand and carry sleeping Caleb to bed with the other, now startled at his own reflection. He moved around the house like he expected someone to tap him on the shoulder. Someone named Aaron. I lifted Caleb into my arms and walked him to his room, the soft thud of Daniel's footsteps echoing from the bedroom. Not pacing, not moving things, just standing. Caleb looked over my shoulder toward the shadowed hallway. "Mama?" "Yes, baby?" "Is Aaron coming here?"
I didn't know what to say.
So I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and turned off the lamp. But long after his breathing settled into the soft rhythm of sleep, I stood at the doorway, watching the thin curtains sway from a breeze that shouldn't exist. A cold draft carried down the hall, brushing past me. The faint sound traveled with it, something like a sigh, or a whisper. From Daniel's room. I stepped quietly toward it, heart fluttering in my throat. The door was cracked. A sliver of light spilled out onto the floorboards. I pushed it open gently. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. His back trembled with each uneven breath. He didn't hear me come in. "Daniel," I whispered. He didn't look up. "Tell me who he is," I said, voice soft enough not to break him.
Still nothing.
"Tell me why you think he's alive." His fingers curled tighter against his forehead. A tremor rippled down his spine. Then, finally, a whisper, hoarse and spilling from him like something he'd been holding for years. "Because I never buried him." My breath caught. Daniel lifted his head, eyes glassy and distant, as if replaying a memory he wished he could erase. "Miriam," he whispered, voice cracking. I left him behind. A weight, heavy and ancient, settled on the room. The overhead light hummed. The curtains swayed again from a draft colder than the night outside. Daniel's voice broke on the last word. "And he found us." I stood frozen at the doorway, heart pounding in the quiet. Who was Aaron to Daniel, and why did he believe the boy was still alive? The answer waited somewhere in the shadows. And from the way the night pressed against the windows, I knew it was coming closer. The night had settled heavy over the house, the kind of darkness that feels poured rather than fallen, thick, unmoving, almost listening. Rain from the earlier storm still clung to the window frames, glittering faintly when the porch light flickered. I'd just begun drifting into sleep when the low rumble of an engine pressed through the silence. Not fast, not casual, just waiting. I sat up, heart nudging my ribs. The sound came from the road, then the gravel, then the narrow strip of grass between the mailbox and the driveway. Headlights off. No radio. No door opening. Just an engine idling close enough for the vibration to creep through the floorboards. I reached for my robe and moved to the window. The curtains trembled with the draft from my hand. And there it was, that same old pickup, the one with the uneven grille and the faded blue paint. It rolled to a stop like a slow exhale. Too slow, too deliberate. Aaron had fallen asleep curled on the rug beside Eva's bed, as if the ground still felt safer than any mattress. Eva lay above him, one arm dangling over the edge of the bed, fingers brushing his hair. I stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling that old instinct crawl up my spine, a mother's instinct, sharp and immediate. I didn't bother with slippers. I walked straight to Eva's room and touched her shoulder. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "wake up." She blinked at me, confused only for a breath. Then she sat up too quickly, eyes darting to the window behind me. "Aaron," she whispered urgently. He was awake before she finished speaking, scrambling upright, breath already shaking. "It's him," he murmured. "He came back." My hands trembled just once, then stilled, the way they used to when both my children were babies and storms rattled their windows. "Come," I said, motioning them toward me. "Both of you." The floor creaked under our steps as I ushered them down the hall into my bedroom, the one with the heavier curtains and the window that faced the backyard instead of the road. I shut the door gently, the latch clicking softer than my heartbeat. Then I turned off the lamp and let the moon paint thin silver lines across the carpet. "Stay here," I whispered. A soft thud hit the back door. Not a knock. A test. Aaron gasped quietly. Eva grabbed my hand, squeezing so tight the bones shifted beneath her fingers. Another thud. Then the hard rattle of the doorknob. Someone was trying to open it. Someone confident enough to try without fear. I stepped closer to the children. "Do not move," I breathed into their hair. Footsteps crunched around the side of the house, slow, steady, like someone walking the perimeter and counting windows. The tapping began next. A light rap on the glass above the kitchen sink. Then the dining room. Then the living room. Not enough to break anything. Just enough to let us know he could. Eva whimpered, her breath shaking against my shoulder. Aaron pressed his forehead into my back like a child hiding from a shadow he once knew too well. "Lydia," he whispered, voice breaking, "he's done this before." I swallowed hard. Before what? Before he ran away? Before he learned to hide himself in clothes that weren't his? The tapping stopped. Silence rushed in, heavy and expectant. I listened for the engine, but the truck stayed quiet. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. Not tonight. I forced my breath into something steady, something I hoped they wouldn't hear shaking in my... But safety felt fragile, like a sheet of ice under our feet. Footsteps crunched closer. Now directly beneath our window. A shadow crossed the thin sliver of moonlight leaking through the curtains. Aaron stiffened, hands gripping the blanket behind him. Eva buried her face in my arm. The silhouette paused, listening, sensing, waiting. My heart thudded so loudly, I felt sure the whole house could hear it. I pressed a hand over Eva's ear and leaned closer to the door, straining to catch any hint of movement. Then a scrape, like a fingertip dragging across the outside of the siding. "Lydia," Aaron whispered again. "He always takes his time." I closed my eyes, 1,000 questions tightening in my chest. Whoever this man was, he wasn't a stranger. Not to Aaron. Not to the fear in his eyes. And not to the ghost of my late husband's secrets. That realization sank into me like cold water, numbing, clarifying. My children, because yes, now I understood they were both mine in all the ways that matter, were trembling behind me. And a predator circled the home I'd spent years believing was safe. I stepped forward, my voice barely more than breath. "You're not taking them," I whispered to the air, to the night, to the man outside. A moment later, the engine ignited. Smooth.
Quiet.
As if someone had decided the game could wait until tomorrow. The truck rolled away, tires crunching over gravel, moving with a slow confidence that made my stomach twist. Not retreating. Repositioning. Eva lifted her head, eyes shining with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Is he gone?" "For now." Aaron hugged his knees to his chest. "He won't stop." I turned to them, brushing their hair back with trembling fingers. "Then he'll learn something," I whispered. "He'll learn that he isn't the only one who doesn't stop." The children looked at me, Eva with trust, Aaron with disbelief softening at the edges. And somewhere deep inside me, something old and fierce rose up. Something that had nothing to do with fear. A mother's vow, quiet as breath but stronger than any storm. "No one touches my children. Not again." Outside, the night held its breath. I held mine. And somewhere on that dark road, a promise hung heavier than the thunder that had rolled through hours before. Tomorrow he would come back. I could feel it. But next